The police admit they got it wrong. A man guns down a black neighbor who was trimming a tree. The police knew of the problematic and erratic behavior and criminal element connected to this man. They failed to act, and the chief has admitted they dropped the ball. All right, let's get into it. Put up the picture, full mass. That brother should not be in a hospital bed at all. You see, a white Minneapolis man is accused of shooting and critically injuring his black neighbor. You're looking at Davis Moturi. Had made a series of threats against the victim. Critics say were ignored, completely ignored by the police. So the police chief, you're looking at him, Brian O'Hara on the right, admitted as much on Monday, telling reporters, quote, "Yes, we failed this victim. He should not have been shot." Keep up the picture. You're looking at a cause and effect. The effect is the black male with bullets in his body. The cause is either intentional, hyper-aggressive racism, or the kind that is more subtle in some. But it leads to the same result, bias. Bias. You can't tell me if a white female in the community had these same issues with the individual who did this, that the police would not have acted. That's what basically the police chief is telling you. John Herbert Sawchak, 54, was arrested earlier Monday and charged with attempted second-degree murder following an extended standoff with MPD SWAT unit in connection to allegedly shooting his neighbor, Davis Moturi, 34, in the neck 5 days earlier. You see, Davis was pruning a tree that his neighbor had planted with his mother when the suspect started shooting from his upstairs window. The previous week, however, according to the Star Tribune, Minneapolis Star Tribune, Sawchak allegedly pointed a gun at his neighbor, told him, quote, "Touch my tree again and I will shoot you," according to the criminal complaint. The neighbor sustained a fractured spine, 2 broken ribs, and concussion. This is what he did to his neighbor. He had contacted police multiple times since April about harassment from Sawchak. O'Hara said police resisted arresting him. This is what the chief said now. The chief told the press they resisted from arresting the man because he was considered high risk and because he has a history of mental illness and possessed firearms. Stop the damn presses. You decide to not arrest somebody because they are, in particular, they are specifically dangerous. They have access to firearms. So you're taking the good taxpayers' money, acting as if you're going to protect and serve, and then when there's an opportunity to do so, you say, well, he's just a little too dangerous, We're going to let this one go. I mean, he may kill somebody. He got access to guns. He's armed and dangerous. But we feel like that's just a little too much for us. What? There's more. Police made multiple attempts to contact Sawchak. Hey, let's talk about this. Since April, and had conducted surveillance on the guy, the chief added, quote, "But I will say this. We had no reason to suspect that he would shoot the neighbor from inside the house," O'Hara added. But see, that contradicts the department's own warnings. In warrant flyers, Sawchak they said he should be considered armed and dangerous. So they put these flyers in the neighborhood on telephone poles earlier this year. The Star Tribune reported that residents were advised to call 911 if they should see him. Do not interact. Call 911. He's armed and dangerous. Okay. So they have concluded he's armed and dangerous. They have said this individual should be arrested. There's more. The Mr. Moturi did several times. So the warrant is out. Davis Moturi, the neighbor, he contacts the police. The victim's wife, Caroline, writing a GoFundMe, said police were indifferent to the living nightmare. So you have a man with a warrant for his arrest, armed and dangerous, flies around the neighborhood. The neighbors call and say, hey, he's next to us. He harasses us. We knew he was a criminal. We got him. I'm glad you all got him. Let's go ahead and get him. This is the address. Indifference. They don't do anything. Caroline said Sawchak had previously threatened her husband, who was on a 10-foot ladder at the time with a gardening tool. In another incident, Sawchak chased her husband with a shovel. She said, there's another quote, shortly after moving in our neighborhood, our neighbor began harassing us, threatening us, and stalking us. Despite multiple calls to police for help, we were constantly or consistently informed nothing could be done, Miss Caroline. At one point, an officer responded to our distress, told us, quote, just move out. Just move. Quote, despite these frequent acts of violence, a warrant was only issued when I, his white wife, reported I was being verbally threatened. Caroline Moturi said, Davis Moturi has been released from the hospital and is expected to recover. Quote, I can't bring myself to think of where we would be had the angle of the bullet been slightly different, she wrote. My husband is alive, but no thanks to the MPD or Mayor Jacob Fry. The Minneapolis City Council has condemned law enforcement's handling of the situation, blasting its failure to protect the resident, quote, from a clear, persistent, and amply reported threat posed by his neighbor. Our chief of police is hiding behind excuses, and our mayor is just hiding. That's what Council Member Emily Koski wrote on X. O'Hara defended his department actions against allegations of indifference, though he did strike a more conciliatory tone than expressed last Friday when he accused the victim of escalating the situation by cutting the tree. Sawchak surrendered outside his home around 1:30 a.m. after a 5-hour standoff in which a negotiator used a loudspeaker to urge him to leave his residence, and police threatened to use the use of gas. He didn't get killed. They didn't run up in there and blow him up. They didn't just shoot indiscriminately like they have done with unarmed Black people inside of apartment complexes. They didn't do any of that. They waited. They got a negotiator. The negotiator, I'm sure, was paid a lot of money. They stayed there. They preserved his life. Sunday evening, police cordoned off the area, called in a SWAT negotiator as drones circled the home. Police busted out windows, delivered a cell phone for the suspect to use and communicate with them. Finally, they announced their intention to tear gas his residence, leading the man to surrender. The Minneapolis police somehow did not act urgently to prevent that individual from being shot, the chief said Monday. And to that victim, I say, I am sorry that this happened to you. Police monitored the residents after the shooting, waiting for Sawchak to emerge. Police sat and watched over the residents for several days. This week, O'Hara said, waiting for him to emerge. They were trying to avoid a violent confrontation that may have led to the use of deadly force, he said. Despite his arrest, Caroline Moturi said she and her husband have not returned to their home. Quote, we have reached the point where we need everyone to be outraged with us and demand action, she said. How many times does the country need to see the justice system fail Black men before the system changes? Understand the variables of this story. Black male has credible evidence and logged official complaints about his neighbor and criminal activity against him, against himself. A warrant is put out for that neighbor. He calls the police again. He's right next door. Instead of the police actually arresting him, they decide, according to the chief, to surveil him. But see, that really didn't go down until the wife of Davis Moturi, who happens to be a white female, contacted the police and said, hey, he verbally harassed me. All of a sudden, the police department moves, gets its muse again to do what they are sworn to do. So what do you have here? You have a culture. You have a culture. You have a culture that's contrary to the rules of engagement. We will bring you updates to this story, but his wife is completely correct. Sharon, thoughts here?
I'm not a lawyer. I often say that to you, Doc, but this isn't an accident. This isn't a mistake. The police are complicit in this white neighbor nearly killing this Black man. And I've been Black long enough to know that if a white neighbor called up and said, my Black neighbor is brandishing a weapon and I feel threatened, they would not say, well, this one man militia needs to just stay in place because we just don't have a way to deal with it. Bye. That's not what would have happened at all. A lawsuit, something, I think it's criminal. But again, I'm not a lawyer, Doc.
Well, I got to tell you, it should be tried. I know the Supreme Court has ruled in a particular way that seemingly prohibits the prosecution of cops due to inaction, but I do believe it should be tested.